Gentleman from California.
Mr. Speaker, I'm delighted to yield as much time as he might consume to the distinguished ranking member of the Judiciary Committee, my friend from Ohio, Mr. Conyers.
Gentleman from Michigan is recognized for as much time as he may consume.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I thank my old friend from California, Tom Lantos, for his generosity. I can assure him I will not abuse it. I'm also happy to join the former chairman of the House Judiciary Committee, Henry Hyde, in this discussion. I want to just throw this out because I may not be correct, but is this a measure, H.J. Resolution 75, a way of us expanding the war to Iraq? I assume the answer is yes. And I yield. Yes, I will yield. Of course.
This measure is the exact opposite of what you have just suggested. It demands of Saddam Hussein what he agreed to 10 years ago: full and complete access to places where weapons of mass destruction are produced. It gives him one chance, one final chance, to do what he agreed to do when he surrendered 10 years ago.
I thank the ranking member. Well, the colleague from California, who's more an expert on foreign affairs matter than I, Mr. Rohrbacher, said, now is the time to finish the job. I guess that's not very ambiguous, is it? And then he went on to explain something that could be troublesome. We are at war. We are not at war with Iraq, but we are at war with Saddam Hussein. Well, that introduces a new concept into. I'm only on the Judiciary Committee, so our impressions have always been that nations declare war on another. We don't declare war on even terrorists or a head of a country or anything else. I see Mr. Rohrbacher in the aisle there. That looks like I'm going to yield for just a moment. Yes.
Your quote was a little bit mistaken. I said that we were not at war with Iraq, but Saddam Hussein is at war with us.
Oh, okay. Well, that's much better, because that means then that we don't have to declare war on China's leaders either. They're at war with us, not the people. Did I get that right? I yield to the gentleman.
No, that was only based on if Ron Paul's assessment is correct. It was predicated on if Ron Paul's assessment is correct and they are supporting terrorists and planning to kill thousands of Americans, yes, they are at war with us.
Wow. Couldn't we tailor this document a little more narrowly than bringing China into this? Oh, you didn't do it. Okay. Well, okay, let me go to the next part. I asked my good friend Tom Lantos about the hearings, and I was told that there were no hearings, no witnesses, but there was a markup last Wednesday. Now, is that right? I've got to get something right down here in the well before I return my time. Okay, that much is right. We didn't. Is there some reason that we didn't have witnesses? Okay. Silence. Well, all right, then the only other thing that I could add, ladies and gentlemen of the committee, is that there's been a change. There was original language that considered should be that Iraq's refusal to admit UN weapon inspectors pursuant to Security Resolution 687 should be considered an act of aggression against the United States and its allies, and that language has been struck. Yes, sir. With pleasure.
We did have hearings, Mr. Conyers, on the 4th of December. We had two of the inspectors who were over and were shut out by Saddam Hussein, and a lady expert on arms control from the Clinton administration. So we had hearings.
Thank you, sir.
Well, the time of the gentleman has expired.
Time.
Well,
I'll be
yes,
glad
sir.
to yield the gentleman 2 more minutes.
The gentleman is recognized for 2 more minutes.
Thank you very much. I appreciate that. Well, okay, so none of my premises have been right so far. It's like the Detroit Lions, who broke their record last week. Maybe I can do something here. Okay, now, am I right that we have substituted new language for this statement? I've got you now. The old language was, the original language was that Iraq's refusal to admit UN weapons inspectors pursuant to Security Resolution 687 should be considered an act of aggression against the United States and its allies, and that language has been removed, and we have inserted new language. Now, does anyone challenge that in the body? Okay, all right. Okay, I got that in. And the new language says that 687 and 707 and other relevant resolutions presents a mounting threat to the United States, its allies, and international peace and security. Does anyone have anything to help me understand that better? Okay. So essentially, instead of an act of aggression, we have put in a mounting threat. And I noticed there seems to be general agreement on that. So we've had hearings, we've had a markup, we've modified the language for people who may be nervous about where this might be going. But I must confess, as I return to my seat, I'm not sure if we should be expanding the war to Iraq.
Time of the gentleman has expired. Who seeks time? Gentleman from Texas.
I yield myself such time as I may consume.
Gentleman is recognized for as much time as he may consume.
The emphasis in this resolution is that resolutions have been passed, one in particular, a UN resolution against Iraq, and it's to be enforced. And I made the point that earlier that there are many resolutions that aren't enforced, so this one is special and has to be enforced, and the assumption is that it will be the responsibility of the United States. Everybody knows that I'm not too keen on the United Nations, but I'm not too keen on the idea that you can use the United Nations as you please. Sometimes you follow the rules and sometimes you don't. I think if we're participating, the argument should be that we should follow the rules. I don't think there's any UN authority for us to use force against Saddam Hussein without a new UN resolution. That would be very, very difficult to mount another invasion of Iraq right now without a UN resolution. I think it just would not go along with the rules. The other question I have about the rule of law and trying to follow the rules of the United Nations would be where have we gotten the authority to enforce the no-fly zones? The no-fly zones is really a contention in the Middle East, and it's been a contention for a long time because that, in combination with the embargoes and the sanctions against the Iraqi people, is what the Arabs believe to be so detrimental to the children who have died in Iraq. Whether you agree with that or not, and you want to put all the blame on Hussein, that's beside the point, because millions, if not billions, of Muslims and Iraqis happen to believe that policy. But where did we get this authority to continue bombing for now going on to 12 years? It said that we know exactly what's going on in Iraq. I pointed out that the International Atomic Energy Agency has been in there this year and found out that there's no evidence that a nuclear weapon's being built. But there is one gentleman that's been in Iraq many times under the UN inspector, Scott Ritter. He's been there 30 times. Probably more times than even the best junketeer of Congress, I bet you, hasn't been over there for 30 times. But he's been in there 30 times inspecting. Now, he was on the television interview the other day, and he had an opinion about what is going on over there. And I don't think you can jump up and say, well, Scott Ritter's not a true American. He's not a true internationalist. He doesn't know what he's talking about. But this is what he said on television when they asked about whether or not they thought Saddam Hussein in Iraq was a threat to our national security. He says, in terms of military threat, absolutely nothing. His military was devastated in 1991 in Operation Desert Storm and hasn't had the ability to reconstitute itself in terms of weapons of mass destruction. We know that we achieved a 90 to 95% level of disarmament. Diplomatically, politically, Saddam's a little bit of a threat. In terms of real national security threat to the United States, no, none. Because he is a little bit of a political and a diplomatic threat. We are making these plans to really pursue war or continue the war, because the war really hasn't ended. So once again, I ask my colleagues who are going to be voting on this shortly to think about it. If it's unnecessary and doesn't have any effect, why bring it up? There'd be no purpose. If he's aligned with the terrorists, the president already has authority to do something about it. So what really is the reason for this, especially when it was announced that this would be an act of aggression, which is really what they feel in their heart, in their minds, what they want this to be. It's been toned down a little bit. But this is a support for expanding the war and continuing what has been going on for 12 years. And quite frankly, I think there's a better diplomatic way to handle things. I think it's a shame that our Secretary of State hasn't been given more authority to have his way on this, rather than being overruled by those and encouraged by many members here in the Congress to get ready because of this fantastic success. You know, in Afghanistan, a country, probably the poorest country in the world, didn't even have an airplane. And now, because of this tremendous success, we're ready to take on the next country. But one thing that we have to realize is that there is a great chance, and there is some evidence, and I may get a chance to quote this later, that China may well have been involved. Now, the gentleman from California said, oh, it is, so let's go after China. I mean, we're not going to go after China. We're going into Iraq for other reasons than just national security. That's my firm belief. And it has a lot to do with the announcement when we propagandized to go to war in the Persian Gulf War, and it was to go to defend our oil. And I still believe that is a major motivation for our foreign policy in the Middle East, and I retain the rest of my time.
Gentleman reserves his time.